Hello everyone, welcome back to My Hero Academia Podfic. This will be the continuation of Yuuei Survival Guide. This will be part 23, chapter 23. Nothing changes when it comes to school Monday morning. Izuku, Ida, and Todoroki speak not a word of their internship escapades, and there's chatter about the hero killer, of course. It's a hero school, and everyone would have watched the news or even just heard the news that the hero killer Stain was finally off the streets. There's a small, prideful part of Izuku whenever he hears someone mention the hero killer, and he knows Todoroki and Ida, to a lesser degree, all feel that jolt of pride. Maybe no one would ever know it was the three of them who'd taken out the current most wanted criminal in Japan, but the three of them always would, and they'd always share that. Izuku's proud to say that following that dark night in the alleyway and the long, exhausting hospital visit where he'd almost died, he managed to become closer with his friend, and he likes to think that Todoroki is a friend now, too. He'd strengthened his relationship with Ida and gotten a new friendship with Todoroki, and he's quite happy with the outcome, though it would have been nice for all that to happen without the three of them battling a wanted serial killer and almost dying, but beggars can't be choosers. It all worked out in the end anyways, right? Their classmates had all been happy to talk about their own experiences interning with a vast selection of pros. Izuku's excited to hear about it all, but deep down he knows very few of his classmates will be able to top taking down a serial killer. Well, Sue and her smugglers bust comes fairly close, especially since the three of them can't tell their peers about what they'd actually accomplished on internships. After school, Shota walks Izuku down to see Power Loader after their heroics class. They hadn't done anything that needed their costumes, and Izuku had a sneaking suspicion that that was just because Shota didn't want Izuku participating in class when there's a chance he might drop to a hypothermic cold randomly due to his quirk. He seemed intent on getting the new costume sorted out with all the added features, and Izuku can't lie and say he's not grateful for the speed. Despite Izuku's promise that he probably won't get as cold as he had that alley with Todoroki, after having the vestiges using all his energy, Obro's still hesitant to get too close or to use their quirks at all. Not that there had been a reason, or a chance to use them yet. It's not like Izuku spent much time alone between the hospital visit and coming home to the apartment. Shota and Hisashi really had made good on the strict bed rest order, and Izuku had found himself lounged on the couch near constantly swaddled in blankets and sweatshirts. He's not quite sure how to feel about being coddled. His mother had never really been the type, and her motherly affections faded off by the time he started preschool and could survive on his own, so to be under Hisashi and Shota's watchful eyes, having them deliver food to him at mealtime so he doesn't have to get up, and tucking blankets around him when they slip down or the cats rumple them, it's odd, and it leaves him feeling a bit awkward and uncertain, but at the same time, it fills him with a softness that he's not sure he's ever had lighting up his chest. He's never really had people who wanted to take care of him. He'd grown up fending for himself because his mother was always busy or at work, or pretending she had a normal child, and in doing so couldn't be around him and his weirdness. That would have ruined the facade. She wasn't around, and it was just the two of them after his dad took off, so he learned to rely on himself, to tend to himself, to care for himself, to be able to feed himself and clean up his own scrapes and burns. That's all he'd ever known. So this, having two men, his teachers, no, guardians, tending to him is nice, but also weird, completely and utterly weird. But maybe he could get used to it. So he doesn't really mind that he doesn't have more than a couple minutes alone. He sort of craves the attention in a way, and a small subconscious part of him is just reveling in the fact that they want to be close to him, that they want to care for him, that they look at him and see a normal kid, not like how his mother, his auntie, uncle, and Kachan had always looked at him, like he was strange and unwell, delicate, different. In the end, though, Izuku's just glad that Oboro is finally starting to relax around him again. He might not be ready for quirks to be a part of their dynamic just yet, but he's finally starting to sit beside Izuku again. Baby steps. Plus, it's not like there's a moment to play around with the quirks when Shota and Hisashi were keeping a watchful eye. Though he can't quite push for using the quirks for learning more about them. Izuku's happy to just have his friend back. Not that Oboro really left. He wasn't usually more than 10 feet away, but he'd missed the proximity he'd come to know. Besides, he's not sure Oboro will even so much as touch him until the heated jacket Hisashi had scoured the internet for arrives. Not that Izuku is complaining, he doesn't want to die by a ghost quirk overuse, but for now he'll just stick to wearing his selection of sweaters. The school week that passes by is uneventful. They don't do much quirky work, and when they do, Shota keeps Izuku on a tight leash when using One for All and watches him carefully for any signs of a lowered core temperature or early signs of hyperthermia. The green-haired teen hopes that by the time his new hero costume's ready, Powerloader had requested until Monday that the following week, until after they'd talked on Monday, Shota will start to loosen up a bit. The teen gets the protectiveness. He had almost died, but he can't learn with Shota hovering so much. He'll just have to wait and see if the upgraded costume makes any difference in how Shota has been teaching as of late, and after Izuku has it, hopefully it'll mellow him out when he's not in constant fear of Izuku keeling over for hypothermia. Izuku has to bite his tongue to keep from telling his homeroom teacher that he won't freeze to death now, not with Oboro refusing to even step in his general area, and the radio silence from the vestiges. And Todoroki has been working more with his fire side in an attempt to get it up to par with control of his ice side, so he's made bounds and leaps with his progress, and Izuku is so happy for him. He's glad Todoroki is honing his skills. His quirk. That said, there's literally nothing to drop Izuku's temperature around, but if he tells Shota that, it might raise more questions, and Izuku doesn't want to answer those. He can't have someone like Shota looking in too closely at him. He's not sure what he'd do if his guardians found out about his quirk, if they took off like his mother. Izuku slumps more into the couch. He's got Nemo pressed against his thigh, not purring but clearly happy. She's got her feet tucked under her like a little loaf of bread, and behind Izuku, tucked into the throw blanket that Izuku had spent the majority of his medical leave under, is Blanket. He doesn't tend to purr, but he does do a lot of talking, chuffs and meows and clicking noises. Right now, though, he's sleeping soundly, making that cute, tired cat noise whenever the blanket shifts around and disturbs him. There's tea on the coffee table, but it's probably cooled off by now. He'd really just wanted something to do to distract himself, and making tea had seemed distracting enough. But now he has tea that he doesn't really want to drink, but he'd feel far too bad about wasting it. Maybe he can just add some ice to it later and make an iced green tea. It's Sunday. Sundays were fairly routine. Shota would get dressed, sometimes in his hero costume, sometimes in civilian clothes with his capture weapon around his neck. He leaves for most of the morning, usually, and he isn't home until after lunch. He does the same thing after school on Thursday, where he returns just before dinner, sometimes even after dinner, much to Hizashi's dramatic dismay. Thursday is one of the days that Izuku finds his own way back to his guardian's apartment. Hizashi usually takes the car to the radio station for prep for his show the following evening, and with Shota off doing whatever it is he does, Izuku gets another hour or so alone in the apartment, after travel time at least. Izuku's never asked about where Shota goes, and he's got no right to do that anyways. It's not his business, and if Shota's never told him, he probably doesn't want Izuku to know, right? Sundays were routine, but today was different. Hizashi, who usually hangs around with Izuku all day, had been called away to the radio station to cover for one of his co-workers who'd caught a cold and lost their voice. He'd left the apartment after making sure Izuku was fine with him going, fine to be alone, to which Izuku nodded his encouragement and promised he'd be fine. He didn't mind being left alone. He just wasn't usually alone. Shota and Hizashi had near-mirrored schedules outside of school hours. One patrolled in the mornings, the other at night. That meant usually someone was home with him, whether awake or asleep. Not that he was ever really alone with Oboro around. Izuku enjoys the silence of the living room. He could turn the TV on, but he likes to have a moment to himself to just think. He doesn't really think of anything specific, just what comes to mind. His thoughts drift, hardly focusing on one thing for far too long at a time. He's broken out of his thoughts, though, by the door unlocking. He doesn't need to worry. Robbers don't have keys. Izuku doesn't think anyone besides himself, Shota, and Hizashi have keys to the apartment. Maybe Nomori or Ida Tensei, but Izuku doesn't know. Izuku cranes his neck to look back at the door as it finally clicks open. "I told you not to do it." Shota's voice carries in from the hall, and Izuku hears him kicking off his boots. The green-haired boy cocks an eyebrow, opening his mouth to greet the man until he hears a second set of shoes hitting the floor. His jaw snaps shut. "Yeah, well, you tell me not to do a lot of stuff." A voice younger and familiar echoes through the air. "It seemed pretty harmless. How was I supposed to know that the scarf would unhook? It hates me. I think it did it on purpose." "Common sense," Shota deadpans, voice annoyed and huffy. "A capture weapon doesn't have feelings, so no, it doesn't hate you. You just can't control it for shit. Hope you learned your lesson. I'm usually right, don't forget it next time." There's an exasperated "hey" thrown out in annoyance, but following it silence settles. There's a pause, shuffling footsteps getting closer, and now Izuku has stayed still and quiet too long to be able to flee to his room. Shota rounds the corner, looking back at whomever he'd brought with him, with a raised eyebrow. He doesn't seem to notice the green-haired boy, frozen stiff on the couch just yet. You know, I'm going to get blamed for this, right? Your mother said no to the capture weapon and I pushed for it. Now I'm sending you home broken, and it's my ass on the line. She's going to throttle me. It's not my fault you're afraid of my mom. There's a humored snort, followed by a light huff of annoyance from Shota. It edges towards Fond, and Izuku is beyond curious of who his guardian's talking to. The voice continues, tinged with dissatisfaction. And besides, I don't know how she expects me to be a hero when I can't even... The voice cuts off abruptly. One set of footsteps stops suddenly, but the other keeps going. Shota disappears into the kitchen without a glance into the living room. Sho? What? Comes the stiff reply from the kitchen. Izuku hears the freezer open, has half a mind to turn his head and lean so that he can look into the kitchen as well, but he remains frozen in place, silently hoping that he'll just blend in with the cats and furniture. There's someone on your couch. Yes, I'm aware. Shota's steps start up again, in no way any faster than before. He peers around the doorframe, catching Izuku's wide gaze. The man blinks, angles his head slightly to the left before huffing out a sigh. Problem child, Shota says in way of greeting, head angling forwards faintly along with the words before he's looking back towards the other person. You. Shota narrows his eyes in challenge, pointing half-heartedly to the armchair at his side. Sit. The other teen hesitates for a second, where he's still standing, before following orders swiftly. Izuku sucks in a breath when he finally sees who it is. It's Shinso. Of course, it's the kid who hates him, the kid he'd probably almost gotten disqualified from the sports festival due to Obero's unwarranted help. Of course, it's the kid who'd shot down all of Izuku's vain attempts at friendship following their first meeting, and the one who thinks Izuku is nothing but a, well, not to be rude, but nothing but a kachan. A stuck-up, powerful, quirked asshole who's been handed everything just for being born powerful. He's not. It's, quite frankly, the furthest thing from the truth, but Shinso thinks that. He'd said so himself, and Izuku hadn't been able to find the words to defend himself, or correct Shinso. Not that he thought he would have been able to, if he tried. Izuku's kicking himself for not being able to place the voice sooner, or not disappearing into his room as soon as he'd heard Shota with someone else. Midoriya? Shinso seems surprised, just as much as Izuku is by the revelation. He lingers by the chair and only sits when Shota gives his shoulder a tipping push before crouching in front of him. Hi, Shinso. Izuku gives an awkward wave, trying to ignore the way Shota snorts out what can only be a humored exhale. He doesn't know what to say or do in this situation. A student is here. A student seeing him here, sitting in his homeroom teacher and English teacher's apartment. Shinso stares hard at Izuku for a second before finally turning his accusing eyes at Shota. Why is Midoriya in your apartment? Izuku thinks he could turn the question around on Shinso, but he'd like to keep the peace here. There's obviously some sort of relationship here that he doesn't know about. Why else would Shinso be here, completely comfortable in his guardian's apartment and being snarky and demanding with Shota? Izuku feels out of his depth as he shrinks back further into the couch, hoping it'll just have mercy on him and put him out of his misery. Swallow him whole. It doesn't. Pity. Shota is undeterred by the tone of the purple-haired teen. He lulls his attention back at Izuku for a second, observing him silently before looking back at Shinso. He gently grabs the teen's forearm, pulls the appendage away from where it had been curled against his chest. It's then that Izuku sees a swell of his wrist, a sprain if he's not mistaken. Shota lets out a quiet breath as he glances over the sprain, not even looking up as he speaks. Izuku lives here, so I would hope he was in the apartment, or I would have been upset at the lack of a text explaining his whereabouts. Some of the children in my life tend to listen to me. A narrowed glance is thrown back at Izuku, followed by a heavy sigh as his attention drifts back to Shinso's wrist. Occasionally. And wow, firstly, ouch. Called out much? Is his face on fire, or is it just hot in here? Izuku resists the urge to hide his face in his hands, and secondly, damn, that could have been eased into a little more. Izuku knew that Shota was blunt, but that maybe was a bit too blunt, even for Shota. Shinso jerks his chin up in surprise, eyes locking on Izuku, who shrinks down even more into the couch. Shinso opens his mouth, chest heaving like he's ready to talk, but before the purple-haired teenager can mutter a word, he lets out a sharp hiss as Shota prods at his wrist. He doesn't press at it for long. The next second, Shota is pressing an ice pack that Izuku just now notices against his wrist. It's then that Shinso seems to forget the pain and refocuses on his words. Wait, what? It's just a sprain, kid. Looks like I'll get to see you live another day. Shota tells the purple-haired teen, his voice laced with humor. And Izuku is staying with us for the unforeseeable future. Something warm settled in Izuku's chest when Shota says that. He doesn't know why. that doesn't mean forever, but there's something about it that's just... it's nice to hear. He lives here now? Shinso repeats, baffled. Why? I don't think that's any of your business, Hitoshi. Shota shakes his head. You kids pry too much, you and 1A both. Shinso sputters in offense, glaring at Shota. It's a heated glare, one that would have been sent directly to punishment suicide sprints if it had been from anyone in 1A. Shota seems to just brush it off now, though. He pushes himself up to stand, leaving the two teens to silently stare at each other in his absence. Moments later, Shota returns with the first aid kit. He rifles through it before pulling out an elastic compression bandage, turning back to Shinso and holding his hand out for the teen to set his own injured one into it. Shinso does, but not after wrinkling his nose and letting out a huff. Izuku stays completely still, and quiet to the point that he's not sure he's even breathing as Shota works. Shinso watches him with narrowed interest, likely learning how to redo the bandaging. When Shota is finished, he leans away to survey over his work before looking up at Shinso in question. Not too tight? No. The purple-haired boy wiggles his fingers and tests the give to the bandaging. It's fine, thanks. Shota lets out a hum, prodding at Shinso's fingertips. He's probably looking for any loss of circulation, though it looks like it's wrapped up well. Izuku can only wonder how many times Shota himself had to wrap a sprain, or even just how many times he's had sprains. I still don't understand why Midoriya's here. Seeming satisfied with Shinso's circulation, Shota lifts his gaze up to the lavender's eyes. Well, it's a good thing that you don't need to understand then, isn't it? That's not fair. Shinso's eyebrows draw together. How long has he been here? Why is he here? Why here specifically? You don't bring home students ever, so why is he here with you and Zashi? Is this why you've been busy? You can't just bring home a kid and not tell anyone, not tell me. Why didn't you tell me? Oh? Shota drawls sarcastically, patting Shinso's knee just a bit harder than probably needed, before using it as support when he pushes himself back up onto his feet. His arms cross over his chest. I was unaware that my husband and I needed to run our decisions through you first, nephew. And I already told you it's really none of your concern what goes on with me, Hizashi, or Izuku kid. Does Mom know? Yes, Hitoshi, my sister's aware. Shota sighs, rubbing at his eyes with a thumb and an index finger. Not that it matters, it's not her concern either, I just needed her to sign some documents. What documents? Shinso butts in, his own arms are lacing over his chest now. He awkwardly presses the ice pack onto his wrapped wrist, glaring up at Shota. The same ones that Zashi and I signed in case of an emergency for you. My mom is Midoriya's godparent? No, my sister is Midoriya's secondary emergency contact after Hizashi and I. The fact that she's also your mother is unrelated, kid. Shota replies easily, as is one of Hizashi's brothers. And isn't that news to Izuku? When had they done that? Sorry, problem child. Shota finally looks back at him. Izuku would have thought that Shota forgot he was even in the room, but he knows Shota is too perceptive for that. We were going to tell you later, when you could meet them. Since we're both pro-heroes, they need to have a safe place for you to go to if there's ever an emergency and we're unavailable. It was a requirement from your social worker. Izuku's not quite sure what to say, but he doesn't need to worry about it because Shinso keeps talking anyways. Wait, so this is legit? Shinso asks, suddenly sounding winded. Like, legit? A social worker, emergency contacts? Why'd you keep this a secret? We didn't. Shota shakes his head. You just didn't ask. I didn't ask? Shinso's glare sharpens. I didn't think I'd need to ask. Hey, Uncle Sho, adopt any kids recently? Who needs to ask that? How long is he staying here? It's not my fault you don't come around. If it was a secret I didn't want you to be a part of, I wouldn't have brought you back to the apartment knowing Izuku was here. He'll be staying for as long as the government permits it. Shota responds casually. He pauses to study the purple-haired teen, eyebrows furrowing. Why are you so upset? This literally doesn't affect you in the slightest, kid. You didn't even know until now. That's my point. You adopted Midoriya. Shinso gestures to Izuku, who shifts awkwardly. Big part of him wants to leave. He'd just been minding his own business, and now he's stuck somewhere he doesn't want to be, but the bigger part of him doesn't want to draw any attention to himself. What's the problem with that? Shota edges, arms crossing over his chest. You had better tread real careful, Hitoshi. I get that you might be upset that you lost him in the festival, but that's no right to act like this. Shinso deflates a little, shooting Izuku a thoughtful scowl. Izuku just swallows, lacing his hands together in his lap. Despite the annoyed looks he's sending, Izuku can't help but feel a little bad. He himself had been bewildered at the kindness from Shota and Hisashi when they offered him a place in their home. He can only imagine how surprising it must be to find out like this, to have it dropped on you suddenly. How long has he been living with you? Why is he living with you? For a second, Shota just stares at Shinso. Then he looks back at Izuku where his expression softens before hardening as he looks back at Shinso. Izuku has been living with us since a couple weeks after the USJ. And, as I already said, Izuku's personal situation has none of your concern. It's been weeks, Uncle Sho. Midoriya's been here for almost a month, and you didn't tell anyone. Shinso sputters, gaze locked on his uncle. You've been completely normal. Nothing's changed, yet something did. You have a kid. Everyone who needs to know does. Shota gives one shoulder shrug, finally stepping away from Shinso and plopping down on the couch beside Izuku. The green-haired teen actually lets out a snort as Shota tugs the blanket behind him, cat and all down over Izuku as well, before scooping Nemo up into his arms. The little brat purrs loudly. Take a breath, Hitoshi. I can't send you home with a sprain and a panic attack. Shinso does suck in a breath, glare not lessening in the slightest. I can't believe this. Yeah, well. Shota hides his face in Nemo's soft coat, mumbling his next words against the purring cat. Believe it. I love you, kid, but you don't get any say in my personal affairs. I'm sorry you're upset. I wish I had all the answers for you, Toshi, but I don't. None that I'm willing to give. There's a pause where no one speaks. Shota has his eyes closed, and Shinso's glaring at the wall across from him, squeezing the ice pack circling his wrist too tight to be comfortable. Izuku's own wrist twinges with phantom pains. Izuku fiddles with his own fingers under blanket, only to be startled when blanket's cold nose bumps against his hand. The tension is suffocating, and Izuku's not sure how to diffuse it. I didn't know that you and Shinso were related. Shota's eyes sliver open, and he gazes over at Izuku. Guess he keeps secrets from you too, then, Shinso snaps, and Izuku folds in on himself even more. Shota blows out a very tired sigh, staring up at the ceiling for a second before his gaze drops slowly to the teen in the armchair. Hitoshi. I'm sorry. Izuku bows his head, wincing lightly at cutting his guardian off. I didn't mean to upset you, Shinso. I really didn't know you were a part of Sensei's life. I know you don't want to be friends, and I get it. I do. Trust me, I do. But please don't be upset with your uncle. He and Hisashi were just helping me out, and I owe them a lot. Izuku, you don't... The teen wrestles his way out of the blanket, sending a silent apology to Blanket the cat, who ends up tangled in it, not that the cat's really complaining in the slightest. Izuku offers Shinso a bow, internally wincing at how awkward he feels. This is, family stuff. I shouldn't be here. Izuku forces himself up, only to bow slightly in Shota's direction as well. I'm sorry for causing trouble between you. Izuku takes the stunned second of silence to make his way for an escape, his feet carrying him away before he's even properly stood up straight again. Izuku. He hears Shota call his name, and he's already fleeing to the room, quickly enough that he doesn't even think about turning and answering. He steps into his room, easing the door shut behind him so it doesn't make so much as a sound. The click of the door shutting is so faint that Izuku doesn't even hear it. Oh, hey, you're back. Oboro greets, gaze barely lifting from where it's fixated on his laptop screen. There's a movie playing on it, or some sort of an older movie that had come out just before Oboro had died. Izuku assumes, at least. It's not the kind of thing Shota or Hisashi would want to watch, but Oboro had begged to use Izuku's laptop to watch it. He doesn't very often deny the ghost things, especially when he flashes those ghost puppy dog eyes. It's not really the sort of stuff that Izuku was interested in either, which is why he was in the living room, with his tea instead of having a movie day with the ghost like usual. He probably should have just stuck it out in here, though. Yeah, Izuku breathes out, slumping back against the door. He doesn't hear the footsteps chasing him, but he does faintly hear Shota's voice. He sounds annoyed, and Izuku can only pray it's not at him. Hey, Oboro straightens up sharply, inching to the edge of the bed as he eyes Izuku up and down. Wait, you okay? Izuku's a little surprised that Oboro hadn't heard any of the conversation, but then again, he can't hear any of the talking from the living room either right now. Izuku reaches up to rub at the back of his neck, shaking his head as he responds. Yeah, I'm good. I'm fine. Doesn't sound it. The ghost frowns. Seriously, what's up? What happened? I didn't know that Shota has a nephew. Hitoshi? Oboro cocks his head to the side. Yeah, you met him at the... Oh. Izuku lets out a humorless laugh, dragging his fingers through his hair as he finally pushes off the door instead of pacing quick lines around the room. He hates me, I think. He's upset that I'm here, and I don't know how to fix it. I don't... Hey. Oboro's voice drops in that way your voice does when you're talking to a scared or injured animal. Take a second, yeah? You still gotta breathe, Izu. And I gotta tell you, you aren't right now, so just do that. Izuku tries to suck in a couple breaths, but it's hard. Wow, okay, you really need to calm down, Izu. Come on, it's okay. Izuku feels arms wrapping around him in a hug, and the only thought that crosses his mind is to just latch on. He clutches desperately at Oboro, hands grabbing fistfuls of icy cold yet surprisingly soft Yuuei blazer. It's all right. It doesn't matter what Hitoshi thinks, yeah? It does. Izuku's nose is pressed against Oboro's shoulder, finally starting to catch his breath. It's a weird feeling. Despite the fact that Oboro's solid in his arms, he has no trouble breathing, even with his mouth and nose shoved into the ghost's shoulder. It does matter. He's Shota's family. I can't wreck that. I can't wreck another family, Oboro. I already broke mine. I won't do that to someone else's. It takes a second for Izuku to realize that he's even hugging Oboro, and when he does, he snorts a tired laugh where his face is pressed into gray fabric. I thought you weren't going to touch me until after I got that heated jacket. Oboro sputters. Well, okay. All right. Well, to be fair, this is the only thing I could think of to get you to calm down. Breathing is a vital part of the whole alive thing, and unfortunately you can't just stop unless you want the repercussions of that, and I 10 out of 10 don't recommend that. I didn't even think about it. I just reacted. You're okay, right? Not too cold? I'm fine, Izuku assures, grinning into Oboro's shoulder. I told you so. Yeah, the ghost snorts, pulling away and holding Izuku at arm's length by his shoulder so he can eye his face. You did. You were right. I was wrong. But still, I don't trust that vestige guy. He could have been trying to kill you. Trying to attempt, I don't know, you into some sort of ghost hug disguised hypothermia death. First was nice, Izuku defends with a playful pout. He helped me understand what happened. I doubt he'd try to kill me now. Besides, you haven't even met him. You can't just dislike guys that you haven't even met. I can, and I will. Oboro finally pulls away, chest puffing out as he does so. That guy wouldn't stand a chance against me. I'll fight him for number 1 ghost privileges. Sure, maybe he's attached to you or whatever, but you met me first. You're going to fight the 200-year-old vestige who's the first wielder of quite possibly one of the most powerful quirks to date? Izuku makes sure the disbelieving curl in his tone is evident, one eyebrow arching in almost a challenge sort of way. If that's what it takes, Oboro chirps, shooting Izuku a playful grin. You're ridiculous, the teen huffs out, lips tilting upwards in a light smile. I can't believe I'm saying this, but you're already my number 1 ghost. Not that your ego needs any more praises. Probably not, Oboro agrees, eyes wide with mirth. Izuku opens his mouth to reply, but a knock on his door has him snapping his jaw closed, and jumping away from the ghost even though they weren't even touching anymore. He waits for Shota's voice to come through the door, but after a long second, he hears nothing. Izuku clears his throat. Come in. He hadn't heard the front door even open or close, but he assumes that Shinso must have left as Shota was coming to talk to him. He's completely wrong, he notes, when the door wedges open and purple eyes peek in at him. Shinso! Izuku jolts up. I thought you were, You thought I was Shota? The teen fills in, opening the door a little more, but making no move to pass the threshold. Understandable. Izuku hesitates for a second before slowly nodding. Sorry. Shinso's nose wrinkles slightly at the apology, but he doesn't say anything. The silence drags on. What are you doing here? Izuku breaks the uncomfortable silence that the two are left in. He shuffles awkwardly, wringing his hands together. Not that I mind, you don't really like me, so I can't imagine why you'd, be here at the guest room. I came to apologize. Ah, so Shota sent him then. Uncle Sho didn't send me, if that's what you're thinking. Shinso shakes his head, arms crossing loosely over his chest. He digs the toe of his left foot into the floor, and if Izuku didn't know better, he might think Shinso was nervous. The purple-haired teen averts his gaze, glaring down at the floor. I doubt he even would have let me come back if I asked. He's kind of mad at me now. Mad enough that he's calling my parents to come get me. Told me not to move while he was on the phone, but here I am. He's going to be upset, Izuku breathes out. Probably, Shinso agrees without hesitating. It's not like it's the first time I've upset him. I mean, I've got a track record. He's used to me being myself and all the dumb shit I do. As if to add imagery to the words, Shinso holds out his wrapped wrist. Izuku frowns at the injury before lifting his eyes up to Shinso's face. That's not true. I don't think that you planned to get hurt. It was an accident, right? He's probably just upset that you got hurt, not that you hurt yourself. Shinso narrows his eyes, mouth pressed in a bewildered expression. He's watching Izuku like he doesn't believe the other teen really exists. He stares long enough that Izuku finds himself shifting under the boy's narrowed gaze. You really are just genuinely nice, Shinso mutters, and Izuku thinks it might be more to himself than to the other person in the room. Izuku furrows his brow. The what he wants to ask is dying on his lips as Shinso continues. I thought you were being condescending after you won, when you were being so nice. People aren't nice, especially after I used my quirk on them. Izuku's mouth forms an O shape before he lets a frown curl onto his lips. I wasn't trying to be condescending. Shinso turns his head to glare at the doorframe, looking like he's biting the inside of his cheek. Yeah, I know. A pause. I get that now. Shinso watches Izuku like he's seeing him in a whole new light. It's weird being under observation, but he makes no move to leave or say anything. He just lets his peer study him thoughtfully. There's another, slightly longer pause before Shinso lets out a heavy sigh. He rubs at his eyes, then looks at Izuku, right in the eyes for the first time since their battle at the festival. I'm sorry, Midoriya. I was an asshole, then and today. I let my loss get the better of me, and I judged you based on what I believed you were, instead of what you actually are. I made assumptions about you because your quirk and your whole class. Izuku opens his mouth, but he closes it a second later. That process repeats maybe twice, and he's sure he looks like a gaping fish throughout the whole thing. He just can't seem to find any words, none that seem appropriate for this. Mostly, though, Shinso continues, picking at the wrapping on his wrist. His gaze drops to stare at it. I'm sorry for taking my frustrations out on you today. It was mean. I'm not mad at you. I'm mad at my uncle. He always does this, keeps people in the dark. I was surprised, and I had no idea. I had no right to ask I demanded answers. Shota was right. It wasn't my business, but I insisted anyways like an asshole. So, I'm sorry. You were surprised. Izuku bows his head. I get it. I was wrong. Shinso huffs, irritation in his voice. I was a jerk, and you didn't do anything wrong to deserve it. I get that you have the whole nice guy thing going, but don't defend me, okay? I know I was an ass. My uncle told me I was an ass. As soon as you left the room, I realized I fucked up. I just don't... Shinso lets out a groan of irritation that Izuku thinks might be directed at himself, dragging his palms down his face. Look, I don't hate you, okay? And I hope that you don't hate me either. We're practically cousins now, right? So can you just... I don't know, take the apology, maybe? Okay, Izuku swallows. I forgive you, it's all right. You forgive way too easily. Oboro scoffs from the desk, making his presence known once again. Izuku's gaze darts over quickly before refocusing on Shinso. First that blockhead of a childhood friend that you've got, and now Toshi, who, from what I've gathered, has been a dick to you. The last time Sho used the stay command on the kid, Toshi was 7. Izuku wants to shush the ghost. He also really wants to know what a 7-year-old Shinso did to warrant a stay command from Shota. He doesn't linger on the thought for long as Shinso's words crash over him like a tsunami. Izuku's attention jolts back up to the boy that's still stood in the doorway, eyes as wide as saucers. Cousins? Yeah. The purple-haired teen drawls, blinking owlishly at Izuku. That's typically the word used to describe the relation between two siblings and their kids. My mom and uncle are siblings, and you're Sho's kid now, so... They're just fostering me, Izuku yelps, eyes wide. They're just looking after me. They don't... I doubt they'd want to make it more permanent. It's just the easiest thing. The easiest place for me to be with everything. And Shota's my homeroom teacher, so I trust him. And Hisashi, he's great. I like it here, and they're very nice and kind, but... So you don't want to be cousins, then? No, Izuku blurts out, waving his hands out in front of him. He is waving more and getting more frantic when he realizes what he'd said, rushing to correct himself. I mean, yes, I do, really. I just meant that it's not, like, official. I really, really would like to be your cousin. I've never... Izuku swallows, rubbing the back of his neck. Never had one before. Good, Shinso eyes him. Neither have I. Izuku stills. You haven't? No. The purple-haired teen shakes his head. My dad's an only child, and my mom's just got Uncle Sho, and you know, the whole gay thing, married to a man and all, no accidental babies coming his way, right? A pause where Shinso's smile widens in an almost smirk. Well, besides you, I suppose. Did you just call me an accident? Izuku can't help the laugh of surprise. Shinso lets out a laugh as well, clearly amused with the reaction. He doesn't deny or confirm it, but Izuku hears the tease for what it is. Friendly. This is a different Shinso to the one that he'd seen in the living room, and the one who he'd fought tooth and nail at the sports festival as well. You really don't mind? That is, I mean, that I'm the one here? Look, Shinso blows out a breath, ruffling his finger through his own hair. It's not you, all right? It's nothing personal. Uncle Sho was the only one thing that I had that you perfect 1A kids didn't. I mean, I know he teaches you guys, but he was mine, always had been. My uncle. He's always been the one I looked up to, you know. He's cool, but he's also an ass. So you felt threatened by me? Shinso hesitates, eyes narrowing and eyebrows furrowing before he sighs, slumping against the doorframe like he's suddenly exhausted. Yeah, I guess, maybe a bit. I lashed out, but it wasn't because it was you. It was not really. It was more that I was upset with Uncle Sho. He's always been blunt, but wow, way to ease a guy into it. Yeah, Izuku gives a nod, voice dropping to an almost sympathetic whisper. I thought he would have eased into it a little too. I really am sorry this was sprung on you, but they were just keeping it quiet because I asked them to. You don't have to explain yourself to me. Shinso shakes his head. It was really uncool of me to ask. Your shit is your shit, and just because you're staying with my uncle doesn't give me any right to know. It's not even really about you. I mean, it was, but in a different way. I just get so pissed off when he does stuff like this. He always has been like this. Don't apologize for my uncle's lack of social graces. I mean, we didn't even know when he was dating Zashi until they moved in together. Probably wouldn't have known until he got married if it weren't for Hizashi insisting on a wedding, and even then, we only found out when the invitation arrived in the mail. Shinso shakes his head, dragging his fingers through wild hair. There's a pause. Izuku doesn't know what to say. There's nothing he can say. Shota is a private person. He'd only known the raven-haired man since the start of the school year, but he and the entirety of 1A have all come to that same conclusion. He doesn't necessarily keep secrets, but he also doesn't outright tell people things, unless there's relevance to something else. Oboro lets out a sigh, and Izuku turns briefly to look at him. Kiddo's got a point. Sho is pretty closed off sometimes. He loves his family, don't get me wrong, but he's never been super close with anyone. Not until Hizashi and I got our hands on him, at least. He likes to keep people at arm's length. Izuku wants to question more, ask from someone who'd known Shota for as long as he and Shinso had been alive, without asking the source or the source's husband, but he also doesn't want to pry into something that's not his business, nor does he want to talk to a ghost in front of a peer. He never felt like he needs to tell people stuff, even when people want to know things. He's so private and withdrawn, but I'm used to it. Shinso glares at the wall, a genuine frown on his lips. You know, I learn more about my uncle from Zashi than I do from him. Sad, right? Izuku opens his mouth, but promptly clicks it shut again. He has nothing to respond with. Shinso seems to notice this because he gives a sly, nervous half-smile. Drives my mom nuts, though. Izuku lets out a surprised laugh, letting the admission ease the tension. He wants to defend Shota a bit, but he doesn't want to do that to someone who's known the pro their whole life. It would be insensitive. Besides, Shinso has a right to feel how he feels, just as Shota has a right to keep his private life private, even if it's from close friends and family. Izuku realizes then, as his own laugh dies down, that Shinso is still lingering in his doorframe. Shinso doesn't look put out by it in the slightest. He's made no move to enter the room, but it feels rude to just leave him out there in the hallway, especially now that they're talking. Did you want to sit down? Izuku offers cautiously. He gestures to the bed, then digs his hands in his sweatshirt pocket before he can start anxiously playing with his fingers. Shinso seems surprised, peering further into the room and eyeing the proffered bed before taking a tiny step in. He pauses, unsure, almost like he's waiting for Izuku to change his mind. He doesn't. The taller teen clears his throat. Yeah, okay, just until Uncle Sho realizes I'm gone and he drags me away. The purple-haired teen takes a small step into the room before perching on the edge of the bed. I like your room. All Might fan? Izuku sputters before smiling sheepishly, looking back at the lone poster of the Pro before glancing at the duo set of All Might figures on the desk. One of the figurines is sitting at Oboro's hip, while the other, the ghost, is sitting in. They were his favorites. One of them is the Silver Age costume, the other his most popular and long-standing costume. It's the same one that Izuku had in a onesie form when he was little. It's really the only decoration he has, not wanting to overdo it despite Hisashi encouraging Izuku to make the space his own. He decided in the end to just have his favorite All Might collectibles in the room. A little, Izuku admits, ignoring the way his cheeks heat up as Oboro cackles to the point that he's rubbing at watery eyes. Oboro had seen Izuku's bedroom at the old apartment. Oboro knows exactly what's hidden away in the boxes in the closet. Izuku looks back to shoot a glare at the ghost, but it does little to stop Oboro's cackling. The ghost is hunched forwards, legs hanging off the edge of the desk, and his chest is pressed against his knees. His laughs get breathier, but they don't wane. What are you looking at? Izuku swirls around to face Shinso, who's watching him with a cocked head. What? Shinso shifts from his seat on the edge of the bed, shrugging. You were looking at something, and, well, I've never seen all the cats gather in one spot, but here they are, and they're looking at what you were, too. All of them. Izuku's gaze drops to the cats, who he just now notices are all present. They must have sneaked in when Shinso was standing in the doorway, and Oboro's laughter stops abruptly, but Izuku refrains from turning to look at him. True to Shinso's words, they're all staring at Oboro, Blanket perched on the foot of the bed, watching him intently and waiting for the ghost to wiggle his fingers and entice him over to play. And Fish is curled up on Izuku's pillow, gaze tracking the ghost's movements. Nemo's presence is the most surprising. He's curled up like a loaf of bread, just glaring directly at Oboro, tail swishing in annoyance and ears flattened back. I don't know, Izuku breathes out, panic seizing his heart. Maybe they saw a spider or something? Don't tell Hisashi that, Shinso warns with a frown, one eyebrow arching in disbelief. Izuku wants to ask why he shouldn't mention it to Hisashi, but Shinso continues before he can figure out how to move his mouth again. If they're looking at a spider or something, what were you looking at? Izuku opens his mouth to respond, his heart hammering in his chest to the point that he hears his blood rushing through his ears as he tries to think of an excuse, tries to think of anything to reply with. Hitoshi. The name comes out like a warning, and Izuku jumps, gaze jerking to Shota, who stood stiffly in the doorway. Do you even listen to a word I say? What part of stay don't you understand? Sorry, Shinso winces, bowing his head. I came to apologize for my behavior. Shota bristles, eyebrows narrowing, and he looks at the purple-haired teen. Good, he finally allows, voice heavy with a sigh after watching Shinso for a long second. You should have. You were an ass. I'm not going to tolerate behavior like that again in my house. Remember that. I know. Shinso's head bows down further. I really am sorry, Uncle Sho. Shota stares at his nephew for a second before looking at Izuku, a silent question underlying his expression. The green-haired teen straightens up when he notices, looking between Shinso and Shota rapidly. His expression softens at Shinso's genuine apologetic frown. I forgave him, Izuku tells his guardian with a nod. Really, it was a misunderstanding. We're fine now. Worked it out, right? Shinso nods sharply, and Shota, bless him, just masks a look of confusion behind a frown. Okay. The dark-haired man looks between them suspiciously, like they're up to something. Well, your mother's here, Toshi. Let's go. Already? Shinso frowns, looking at Izuku. But you just called her. Shota angles his head tiredly in Shinso's direction. Yes, but I texted her to inform her of your injury before we even got home. Earlier, before you decided to act like an obtrusive 5-year-old. She was already on her way when I called. I apologized for that. Shinso deflates after the words leave his mouth, glancing at Izuku, the desktop behind the other boy. Oboro cocks his head and watched the purple-haired boy with a frown. The cats, then he looks back at Shota before finally inching off the bed with a sigh. Fine. Shinso gives Izuku a half-hearted wave before moving to walk past Shota, who doesn't quite step out of the doorway, but leaves enough room for Shinso to squeeze past. Shinso huffs at his uncle's antics, but rises to the challenge, tugging his arms in so that he can squeeze in the gap. Hey, Shinso. Izuku presses his lips together as the other boy freezes, turning back to glance at him. Maybe, would you like to sit with me at lunch tomorrow? I mean, I understand if not, it's no big deal, but I know you probably don't want to sit with my classmates, so we can just sit the two of us. I've never seen you in the cafeteria, I don't think, but I know a nice spot outside if it's nice enough out. You really don't have to, so please don't feel obligated. Sure. Shinzo cuts him off, smile widening a little before he seems to force it into a line of indifference. He shrugs, uninterested. If you want, I mean. Sounds okay. I do. Izuku grins. He snaps his mouth shut as his own outburst is relaying in his mind. He lowers his voice after clearing his throat as he continues. So, I'll see you tomorrow, then. Sounds like it. Shinzo agrees. Shinzo turns to leave shortly after, not waiting for anything else and not saying anything more. Izuku hears his feet padding down the hallway. Izuku can't help the giddy smile that splits across his face. Progress. He'd made progress. Shota lingers for a second, eyeing Izuku with a look crossed between amusement and disbelief. A small smile curls onto his lips as he shakes his head. You're something else, problem child. Shota disappears with Shinzo. Wow. Izuku swirls around to stare wide-eyed and surprised at Oboro. That was almost painful to watch. Hey, Izuku scoffs, dropping onto his bed so he can scratch blanket between the ears. I count that as a win. He hated me before today, and now he's agreed to have lunch with me. Win. Lunch the next day goes well. Well, enough that Shinzo comes to join him the next day too, and the day after that as well. Izuku's not sure if the purple-haired teen had many friends in his classes. He'd seen clusters of Gen Ed students in the cafeteria, but never Shinzo. He doesn't know where the other had spent the lunch hour before that, but he's glad he decided to give Izuku a chance. They'd have a good time over the first couple days that they'd eaten together. By Friday, Izuku has slowly integrated the quiet purple-haired teen into his group of friends. Ida blinks in surprise at Shinzo the first time he manages to talk the other boy into lunch with them, but the Gen Ed edition doesn't say anything. It takes a second for Izuku to remember that the two of them had probably met. He thinks back to Shota and Hizashi's wedding photos that he'd seen, where the two boys were mirroring Shinzo and Ida had been posed side by side. Uraraka seems excited to have someone new to talk to, and Sue's also equally curious. Todoroki accepts the newcomer easily enough, but not without cautious looks shot in his direction every so often. It takes a bit for Shinzo to start relaxing a little, and he doesn't when there are others around, but Izuku wholeheartedly believes that he'll soon be able to call Shinzo a friend. Hopefully. Thursday, Shinzo comes back to the apartment with Shota after what Izuku realizes are Shinzo's own personal training sessions with the hero. Shinzo's learning how to use a capture weapon like Shota, and it's so awesome. Izuku leads the other boy into his room after Shota collapses on the couch in exhaustion. Hizashi snorts a laugh and waves them off before disappearing into the kitchen to start dinner. They don't do much more than hang out. They do some schoolwork together, all the core classes are taught by the same teachers, and all the first years get the same curriculum, just at different times of the day. Izuku and Shinzo work on their shared assignments together. The purple-haired boy is stronger in English than Izuku is, and in turn, Izuku can help Shinzo out with his math. It's nice studying with someone, and equally as nice to not have to bother Hizashi with English questions, even though deep down Izuku knows the blonde doesn't mind helping him. Sunday sees Izuku alone in his room. Oboro is with him, reading another book. He's progressed from just being able to turn pages with all his effort to being able to grip the book covers themselves, so he holds them open, turns pages, and to anyone else it would just be an accomplishment, but to the two of them, it's almost groundbreaking. It still takes concentration, and at times when Oboro is too engrossed in the book, the object phases through his hands. Izuku knows when it happens without needing to look up. Books falling to the floor, thump, and there's usually warning to it, because Oboro groans every time. Izuku's on his bed, scrolling through his phone. He just watched videos on the phone, old videos of All Might and some other pro-hero fights that come up in his recommended selections. He's really just waiting for Shinzo to come. It's still a bit early for private lessons with Shota to be over. Oboro is enjoying reading the book that he'd all but begged Izuku to check out at the Yuuei library for him. He'd never heard of it, but Oboro had been thrilled. Izuku glances up at the ghost, who's so immersed in the story. He's hunched over the desk chair, elbows on his knees, and the book's hanging between them. His lips mouth along with the words that he's reading. It's cute how excited he is to read again. Cute, but sad. Izuku doesn't have a second to react when there's a knock on his door, followed by the door opening. Shinzo steps into the room like he'd been there every time since they became friends, or sort of friends. He's freezing abruptly and staring at Oboro. No, not at Oboro. Oboro's a ghost, so that must mean Shinzo's staring at At the book. What? The book hits the ground with a thud. Izuku and Shinso both jump at the sound. Izuku feels like he can't catch his breath, and his eyes lock on Shinso. Shinso's gaze hasn't strayed from the book on the floor. Obo's attention jumps between the book and Shinso before he's staring wide-eyed at Izuku. Do you think he noticed? What the fuck? He definitely noticed. Alright everyone, this concludes Chapter 23 of Yuuei Survival Guide. Chapter 24 will be next, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.